I turned 68 the year my husband stopped recognizing the sound of his own name. Not all at once. That's what people don't tell you about the slow kind of losing. It doesn't come like a storm. It comes like a tide. You notice the waterline moving, but you keep thinking it'll go back out. His name was Raymond. Raymond Aldcroft. He'd worked 31 years for the same insurance company in Columbus, Ohio. The kind of man who kept his receipts in labeled envelopes and knew every neighbor on our street by first and last name. He coached Little League for 11 years, even after our own kids aged out. He made coffee at 5:15 every single morning and always left a second cup on the counter for me without being asked. We were married 43 years. I need you to understand that before I tell you anything else. The first sign wasn't dramatic. He forgot where he put his glasses. Then he forgot our son-in-law's birthday, which honestly I didn't think much of because I'd forgotten it myself twice. Then one evening, he called our daughter by my mother's name, my mother, who passed in 1987. He looked embarrassed and laughed it off. I laughed too. 6 months later, his doctor used the word we'd been careful not to say out loud. I want to tell you what the next 2 years were like, but I'm not sure language does it justice. I became his medication schedule, his appointment calendar, his reminder that today was Tuesday and not Thursday. I learned to answer to names that weren't mine without correcting him. I held his hand in rooms full of people who looked at us with that specific kind of sympathy that makes you want to walk faster. My daughter, she lives in Scottsdale now, has for 12 years, called every Sunday for the first few months. Then it became every other Sunday. Then once a month. She has 2 boys, a husband who travels for work, a very full life. I understood. I told myself I understood. My son is in Portland. He's in tech, does well for himself. He sent a grocery delivery subscription the first Christmas after the diagnosis, which was genuinely helpful. He visited once that first year, stayed 4 days, spent most of it on his laptop at the kitchen table. I was grateful he came. I kept being grateful even as I was also, quietly, something else. I don't want to use the word lonely. It feels like an accusation, and I'm not in the habit of accusing people I love, but I was the only one in that house at 2 in the morning when Raymond got confused and frightened and didn't know where he was. I was the one who sat on the floor of the hallway and held his hand and said his name over and over like a song, until he came back to himself a little. I was the one who drove to every appointment, learned the names of every specialist, filled every prescription, called the insurance company 17 times over a billing dispute that took 4 months to resolve. I did all of that, and I'm not saying it to be a martyr. I'm saying it because it matters to what happened later. Raymond passed on a Wednesday morning in March. He was at home, which is what he wanted. The hospice nurse was there. I was there, holding his hand, the same hand I'd held at a county fair in 1981 when we were both 26, and he won me a stuffed elephant at the ring toss that I still have in the closet upstairs. I called my daughter first. She cried. She said she'd get a flight. I called my son second. He was quiet for a long moment, then said he was so sorry and he'd look at flights right away. The funeral was the following Saturday. My daughter called Thursday evening to tell me that her younger boy had a travel soccer tournament that weekend, a regional qualifier, she said. The kind you can't reschedule. The kind the coach had told parents months ago was non-negotiable. She said she was heartbroken. She said she tried to find a way. She said her husband couldn't take the boys alone because he had a work commitment he'd had on the calendar since January. I sat at the kitchen table while she talked. I looked at the second coffee cup that was still on the counter because I hadn't been able to move it. She said she was so sorry. She said she'd come the following weekend. They could do a small memorial, something more personal. I said, okay. I said it the way you say words when you're not entirely sure they're coming from you. My son called Friday afternoon. His voice was careful in the way voices get when people have practiced what they're going to say. There was a product launch, the kind of thing, he explained, that had been in motion for 2 years, that had his name attached to it in ways that made disappearing for a weekend genuinely complicated. He had a team. He had responsibilities. He said he was devastated. He said Dad would have understood. I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I said yes, he would have. Because Raymond would have. That was the truest and saddest part of all of it. Raymond spent 43 years giving people the benefit of the doubt. He would have nodded slowly and said these things happen and found something kind to say about soccer tournaments and product launches. He was that kind of man. I hung up, and I sat with the quiet for a long time. Saturday morning, I put on the black dress I'd bought in November, the one I bought specifically because I didn't want to be scrambling for something to wear when this day came. I'd been practical about it. I'd been practical about most things. I drove to the funeral home alone. Our pastor was there, 2 women from the church who'd brought us casseroles during the hard months. Raymond's old colleague Howard, who was 74 now and drove 90 minutes from Dayton, who shook my hand and then just held it for a while and didn't say anything. A neighbor, the one who'd shoveled our walk without being asked 3 winters in a row. 6 people, including me. I stood at the front of that room and I looked at the casket, the dark wood one Raymond had quietly pointed out to me 2 years earlier when we had the conversation you're supposed to have. But nobody wants to. And I thought about the 11 years of Little League, the receipts in labeled envelopes, the coffee cup on the counter. The pastor spoke. His voice was steady and warm, and he said things that were true. I didn't cry during the service. I'd done most of my crying in the months before, in hospital hallways and pharmacy parking lots, and once, memorably, in the cereal aisle at Kroger. By Saturday morning, I was somewhere past tears, in the place that's quieter and harder to explain. After, Howard took my hand again and said Raymond was one of the finest men he'd ever known, and I believed him, and I thanked him for driving 90 minutes to say it. I drove home alone. I made coffee. I stood in the kitchen, and I looked at that second cup on the counter, and I finally, gently, put it in the cabinet. My daughter came the following Friday, as promised. She stayed 2 nights. She cried more than I did. She helped me sort through some of Raymond's clothes, which I wasn't ready for, but she seemed to need to do. She hugged me for a long time at the airport drop-off and said she was sorry, truly sorry, and I believe she meant it. My son sent flowers. A very large arrangement with white lilies. They were beautiful. They also died within a week, the way flowers do. What nobody tells you about grief, the practical grief, the paperwork grief, is how much of it you do alone regardless. The accounts to close, the subscriptions to cancel, the form from the Veterans Administration that took 6 submissions to get right. I did all of it at the kitchen table, with a cup of coffee, 1 cup now, in the mornings. I'm not a bitter person by nature. I want to be clear about that. I've never believed in holding grudges the way some people do, nursing old hurts like a hobby. But I am a practical person. I've always been practical. And so, somewhere around the 3rd week of April, I made an appointment with our attorney. Raymond and I had done our estate planning 12 years earlier. Standard stuff, everything to each other first, then split evenly to the kids. We'd updated it once, 8 years ago, to add provisions for the grandchildren. I sat across from our attorney, a quiet, careful man I've trusted for 20 years, and I told him what I was thinking. He listened without interrupting. That's one of the things I've always appreciated about him. I told him about the funeral. I told him about the soccer tournament and the product launch. I told him about Howard driving 90 minutes from Dayton at 74 years old. I told him about Raymond's brother's son, my nephew-in-law, I suppose you'd call him, though the family tree gets complicated. His name is Joel. He's 29, lives about 40 minutes from me, works at a school. He'd come to the funeral. He'd sat with me and hadn't said much because he never says much. But he'd stayed until the very end, and then asked if I needed anything before he left. He'd been helping me with yard work once a month, since Raymond got sick, just quietly showing up on Saturdays without making it into a production. I told my attorney I wanted to change my will. I didn't tell my daughter or my son. I thought about it. I turned it over for a while, the way you turn a stone in your hands, looking at it from different angles. I decided I didn't owe them the conversation yet. There might be no conversation needed. I'm 68, not 100. This might be a document that sits in a file drawer for another 30 years. But if it becomes relevant, they'll understand it or they won't, and by that point, there will be nothing to argue about. Summer came. I joined a grief support group at the church, which I resisted for 2 months and then was glad I finally went. There's a woman there named Glenda whose husband died 6 years ago, and she brings lemon squares every third week and has the most practical, unsentimental wisdom I've ever encountered. She said something once that I've thought about often since. The people who show up when it costs them something, that's who you know. My daughter visits twice a year now. We talk on the phone more than we used to, actually. She calls more often since the funeral, which I notice and I appreciate. Maybe something shifted for her too. I don't know what she carries about that Saturday. I've never asked and she's never offered. My son came in July and stayed a full week. He didn't bring his laptop, or if he did, he kept it put away. We drove out to the lake where Raymond used to fish and sat on the bank for an hour without talking much, and that was the best visit we'd had in years. He looked older, I thought. He looked like he'd been thinking about things. I didn't tell him about the will either. Joel came over in September to help me clean out the garage. Raymond had kept 30 years of accumulated miscellany out there. Fishing gear, old tools, boxes of God knows what from 3 house moves. Joel came on a Saturday morning with coffee already in hand, which made me smile, and we worked for 6 hours without once making it feel like a project or an obligation. At some point in the afternoon, going through a box of Raymond's old Little League things, scorebooks, team photos, a whistle he'd kept for no reason, Joel looked up and said, quietly, "He was real good to my dad when things were hard. I don't think I ever told you that." I didn't know what he meant exactly, and I didn't ask. Some things you receive without requiring the full explanation. I just said, yes, he was. We finished the garage. I sent Joel home with Raymond's fishing rods, which Raymond would have approved of, and a box of tools he said he could actually use. I made us soup first, and we ate at the kitchen table, and it was, in the particular way of ordinary things, one of the better afternoons I'd had in a long time. I'm not going to tell you the will makes everything make sense, because it doesn't work like that. Grief doesn't resolve. Your children don't stop being your children because they made the wrong choice on the worst day. I still love my daughter. I still love my son. Those are not complicated feelings, even when the circumstances around them are. But I think about what it means to show up when it costs you something. Howard, 74, in a car for 90 minutes each way, on a cold Saturday in March. Joel, 29, on a Saturday in September, bringing his own coffee, staying until the work was done. My neighbor, who never once mentioned the shoveling. The 2 women from church whose names I will know until the day I die. 6 people in that room. I know all 6 of them completely, in the way that only a hard day can teach you who someone is. I am not in the room when the will is eventually read. By definition, I won't be. But I can imagine it. In the idle way you imagine things, in the quiet of a house that belongs to you alone now. I can imagine Joel's face. That reserved, careful face that doesn't perform surprise or emotion. Reading a document that says he is seen. I think about the line from the grief group. The people who show up when it costs them something. I think about Raymond, who did that his entire life, who coached Little League long after he needed to, who held the door and left the second cup and drove the extra mile and never mentioned it, who taught me, over 43 years, what showing up actually looks like. The coffee cup is in the cabinet now. Some mornings I think about taking it back out. I don't, but I think about it. I make 1 cup. I stand at the counter in the early light, before the day starts, before the phone might ring or the mail might bring another form to fill out, and I drink it slowly, and I think I know exactly who was in that room. That turns out to be enough. More than enough, actually. It turns out to be the thing I'll carry longest. Not the absence of the people who didn't come, but the faces of the ones who did. Howard's hand around mine. Joel's quiet voice over a box of old scorebooks. The pastor, steady and true. Some rooms, you only fill them once. Raymond knew that. He spent his whole life acting like he knew it. I'm just catching up to him, the way I always was. I've thought a lot about what it means when people show you who they are at the worst possible moment. Not the moments when it's easy, not the Sunday phone calls or the birthday texts, or the flowers that arrive after the fact. I mean the moments when showing up costs something real. Time, money, inconvenience, a tournament, a product launch. Those moments don't lie. I've lived long enough to know that, but I don't think I understood it in my bones until that Saturday in March when I drove to the funeral home alone and sat in a room with 6 people who had chosen, at real cost to themselves, to be there. What I've come to believe is this: the way we treat the people we love when it's hard is who we actually are, not who we intend to be, not who we describe ourselves as at holiday dinners. Who we are when the alarm goes off on a cold Saturday morning and the easiest thing in the world would be to stay home. Raymond was that person his whole life. He didn't talk about it. He didn't keep a ledger. He just showed up. For his team, his neighbors, his colleagues, his family, and never once made it into something you owed him for. I used to take that for granted, the way you take for granted the coffee that appears on the counter every morning. Until one day, it doesn't. You don't understand what a thing cost until it's gone. Howard understood it. He's 74 years old and he drove 90 minutes each way on a cold morning because Raymond had meant something to him. And because that's the kind of person Howard is. Joel understood it too, in that quiet way of his. He didn't make a speech about it. He just appeared at the funeral. And then again in September with coffee already in hand, ready to work. Neither of them asked for recognition. Neither of them seemed to think what they were doing was remarkable. That's the thing about people with real character. They don't know they have it, or if they do, they don't mention it. My daughter and my son are not bad people. I want to be careful about that because I think it's easy to turn a story like this into a verdict, and I'm not interested in verdicts. They made choices I wouldn't have made, and those choices taught me something I needed to know. That's not nothing. There's a kind of hard wisdom that only comes from disappointment, and I'd rather have the wisdom than stay comfortable in assumptions I couldn't afford to keep. What I know now is that I spent a long time measuring love by intention. By what people meant to do, what they planned, what they felt in theory. 43 years of marriage teaches you things, but grief teaches you faster. Love that doesn't show up when it's hard isn't love failing. It's just love revealing its actual size. I changed my will because I am a practical woman and I believe in being honest about what I've seen. Not out of anger. Not to punish anyone. Because the people who carried me through the hardest year of my life deserve to know they were seen, and the clearest language I have for that is action. Raymond taught me that. He didn't say he cared. He left the second cup on the counter every single morning for 43 years. I'm just trying to speak the same language even now, even after.